It's difficult to do a comprehensive retrospective on classic Mega Man because of the fact that there are so many games. Like, Mega Man X only had 14 or so games, and so covering all of them wasn't that much of a challenge for me because there weren't that many. For classic Mega Man, you have 12 main series platformers, and then also remakes, remasters, ports, spin-offs, platformers on handheld consoles, and then a long list of mobile phone games, some of which were Japanese exclusive and made before the App Store era. Needless to say, I'm aware that it's impossible for me to review every single game released under the banner of classic Mega Man, but I thought this video would be a fun way to look back at many of the more obscure and often terrible classic Mega Man spin-offs, just to give you guys watching a taste of what they're like. Since I'd wager many Mega Man fans, especially more recent ones, haven't played all these games. None of the reviews here will be super in-depth, just giving my thoughts on each one, so without further ado, let's get into it. Not every game I'm covering today is a platformer. In fact, many aren't. So I figured the best place to start would be with the two games that were. In the last video, I went over Mega Man's Saga on the Game Boy. I thought all of those games were decent to good. One might think that Mega Man on other handheld consoles back then would lead to equal success, and you'd be wrong. Mega Man on the Sega Game Gear is all you need to point to when debunking this claim. When I discussed Mega Man The Wily Wars, I said that Capcom collaborating with Sega for Mega Man led to two games. The Wily Wars, which remastered the first three Mega Man games for the Sega Genesis, and a new game on the Sega Game Gear, Sega's competition for Nintendo's Game Boy. I don't know when I first learned of this game's existence, but I have never played it for more than like 3 minutes in the past. Like the Game Boy series, this is my first time ever touching this game all the way through, and it was horrible. The game just looks like a bootleg. The cover art is the first sign. The word art is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence because it screams baby's first graphic design as the characters just stand on nothing against a space background and Wily is just a floating head with a transparency effect. I don't know, it just screams that nobody gave a shit about this game from minute one. It didn't even get cover art, which Wily Wars had, even if it didn't end up getting released in stores anyway. See that video for more information. And then the manual just spews a bunch of crap. It seems the game was designed to tell Sega players who Mega Man was, but the manual does a poor job. It says that Mega Man has been saving the universe on console screens around the world for over 10 years, when the Mega Man series wasn't even 10 years old when this game came out in 1995. And then it later says that Mega Man's been battling Dr. Wily since 1985, which is not when Mega Man 1 came out, it was 1987. The manual is where you'd think you'd get a story, but all you get in this game is, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to crush Dr. Wily's humanoid henchmen in a sizzling cybernetic showdown and overthrow the evil doctor's sinister plans to destroy mankind. And that's it. The game possesses no story. The intro cutscene just tells you who Mega Man is, largely ripped from the opening of Mega Man 4, and the manual is just like, yeah, in this game you fight Wily and his robots, have at it. While it's written in the same comically over-the-top fashion as the Game Boy games, it just makes you appreciate them more because they bother to come up with a premise for each game that justified the reuse of old content, and in this game, nobody cared, clearly. But once you get into the game, you really see how easy it is to take the Game Boy Mega Man games for granted. I gave all of those games props for coming up with original level design despite using old bosses, but this game shows you how great of a design choice that was. Mega Man on Game Gear brings back Stone Man, Star Man, Napalm Man, Bright Man, Toad Man, and Wave Man from Mega Man's 4 and 5. But unlike the Game Boy series, this game takes the original NES level design and just drops it into a game with half the screen resolution. The Game Boy games weren't usually frustrating, and I think the reason for that is because of the fact that the levels were designed with the screen space and sprite size in mind. But in Game Gear Mega Man, you'll often be completely unable to see what the heck is going on. In Bright Man's stage, there's the part where you take a different route for an upgrade and then you have to run backwards. On NES, this part is a snap. On Game Gear, forget it, you can't see anything. Napalm Man's level was the worst with this, just impossible to see what's going on at any moment. I said it was good of the Game Boy games to make new levels because it helped the game stand out, but now Game Gear Mega Man both fails at that and creating fitting challenges for the console the game was on. Your only saving grace is that these levels are mostly from Mega Man 5, which is a super easy game. Therefore, you won't be in too much trouble if you play it. And also, thankfully, it's short. but it's absolutely joyless. I thought the Game Boy games all felt pretty slow compared to the NES ones, but I appreciate this in hindsight as well, because bosses in Mega Man Game Gear fly around the room at lightning speed and offer almost no telegraph for their attacks. Stone Man, Starman, and Toadman are not difficult bosses in the least on NES, but here I just can't see or predict what's going on. It sucks. Everything about this just felt wrong. It played like shit, it offers nothing to the series beyond poorly recycled content, and it doesn't even let you continue the stage if you get a game over. You just go back to the title screen, making this the most Stone Age Mega Man game ever made. And get this, there are passwords in this game, but they only work up to a certain point. You can password through the first 4 bosses, but you have to do Waveman, Toadman, and the final level on 1 life set. And what is the final level? Of course, it was Quickman's level from Mega Man 2. And with these controls and the way this game is designed, yeah, I could barely see anything and got a game over, and promptly quit. Sure, it's mean to pick on Mega Man for Game Gear this much, but I just played all 5 Game Boy Mega Man games, which were made for weaker hardware and were infinitely better games in basically every respect. Dr. Wily's Revenge is a game I'd play in a heartbeat over this garbage. So, off to a great start, because this first obscure Mega Man game is a piece of shit. Never touching this one again. So we started in the trenches. Let's see what other obscure Mega Man games we can look at. Well, how about Mega Man and Bass 2? Or rather, Rockman and Forte, Challenger from the Future. While many have never heard of this game either, it certainly feels like a more valid entry in the franchise than the Game Gear game. This was a game released in 1999 exclusively for the Bandai WonderSwan handheld. If you haven't heard of that, I don't blame you. It's not a mainstream device around the world, because it was only released in Japan in 1999 and got discontinued in 2003. However, in typical Capcom fashion, they saw a device and knew Mega Man just had to be on it. So we get Mega Man and Bass Challenger from the Future, a game that was obviously never released in English but has been translated by a fan-made patch. Fans call this Mega Man and Bass 2 because the setup is very similar. At the start, you either pick Mega Man or Bass and play the entire game as them, featuring the same weapons and levels though. Mega Man plays like you'd expect with the charge shot and slide and all that, but Bass can shoot in multiple directions, dash, and double jump. It also uses the music from Mega Man and Bass and has a similar looking level select screen. But ultimately, this game has nothing to do with the Super Nintendo Mega Man and Bass, so it's not really a sequel as much as it is another game with a similar gameplay idea. If anything, the only game this one's connected to is Mega Man 2 for the Game Boy of all things. The plot is that a group of rogue robots from the future called the Dimensions attack Mega Man and Bass, led by the mysterious Mega Man Shadow, and it's up to either Mega Man or Bass to fight against them. Mega Man Shadow looks like Quint from Mega Man 2 on the Game Boy. You know, Mega Man from a doomed alternate timeline where he was turned into a tool of evil. But this is like an alternate version of Quint that became all-powerful and went back in time in the hopes that Mega Man and Bass could defeat him and end his rampage. Guess he has enough of a conscience to know he's doing bad things but can't stop himself? Either way, it was interesting that for the WonderSwan game, they'd bother tying the story back to the least popular Mega Man game on the Game Boy. But then, the game is pretty unremarkable. And that's kind of the issue you run into when digging up obscure games like this. You kind of hope to either find some hidden gem or some ungodly turd to laugh at, but this isn't either of those things. And most games like this aren't. It's Mega Man and the WonderSwan. I had thoughts while playing, such as thinking Mega Man's slide felt a lot shorter than other games, and that the charge shot was smaller than I'd like, and that the animation looked really weird and off-model, but the game plays like Mega Man and functions like Mega Man. You beat bosses, you get weapons, you use weapons on other bosses, it's very run-of-the-mill. There was one neat level where you had to flip the WonderSwan vertically to play, and I thought that was a cool way to use the hardware, but otherwise this game went completely in one ear and out the other. Some weapons were really hard to use, like the dash attack. I don't know how to hurt anything with this without just taking damage. And I thought Bass handled like trash in this. His shots are slow, the dash is only activated by holding down and jump, and the Bass Buster is just too weak to do any real damage to anything. So I didn't play the whole game as him. And then there's a shop system where everything is so overpriced that it took me the entire game as Mega Man to afford reduced damage, and that was all I could get. There were some moments I thought felt cheap, but nothing that sparked any rage or anything. The game is, like I said, pretty unremarkable. Though I thought Bass's face in the ending was really funny. Like, damn, Bass is pretty sad that Mega Man Shadow's dead. But I'd give the game a C- or so. It's not offensive, it's just not really worth playing. When I'd give the worst of the Game Boy games like a C, and the best ones maybe a B-. And the Game Gear game is an easy E grade if anyone was curious. But yeah, we're not off to a super great start when it comes to classic Mega Man spin-offs, so let's change the genre and see what else the series has to offer. Starting with Mega Man Soccer, or Mega Man's Soccer. I kid you not, this was a real game published by Capcom in 1994. Which means that it predates Mega Man 7. Classic Mega Man came to the SNES not in a platformer, but in a soccer spin-off. I have no idea where the idea for this game came from and why it was greenlit and released, but 30 years later, does it still hold up? I mean, no. It didn't get very good reviews at the time, and 30 years later, you just gotta be like, what in the world were they thinking with this? Ever wanted to see Mega Man and a bunch of robot masters battle it out in the soccer field? Well, you're in luck. Here it is! It even got US box art where, like always, Mega Man looks really pissed. The premise is that Dr. Light is watching soccer with Mega Man and Roll, but Wily's robots start attacking soccer games, and it's up to Mega Man to get the enhancements needed to compete with and defeat the 8 robot masters before heading to Wily's soccer field of evil. I had no idea what to expect when going into this game. Soccer games from the mid-90s aren't exactly my area of expertise. As in, I've never played a single one in my life, so I don't know how this compares to international superstar soccer, but I can tell you this, I did not enjoy what I played here. I decided to face off against Cutman first, and the field was inexplicably filled with a bunch of Mega Men and Cutmen. You have to toss the ball down the field towards the opponent's goal and... Wait, I just realized, I'm explaining the mechanics of soccer to you, so instead of that, I'm just gonna assume you know how it's meant to work and cut to the chase. I just found the game really confusing since I could barely see what was in front of me. You need to look at the map on the top of the screen to see where you are in relation to the other players and make choices about what direction to kick the ball in. But looking from the action to the map just felt really disorienting to me, so I lost against Cutman after several minutes of running back and forth and feeling like I could barely take possession of the ball. But after hours of trying really hard, I made it to Wily's castle where you went up against Anchor from the first Game Boy Mega Man game. He had so many special moves that I stood no chance. I then realized this game is ridiculous and decided I was done. Next game. Mega Man Battle and Chase was a Japanese exclusive released for the PlayStation in 1997. A year later, it came to Europe. In America, it was never released until 2006 when the Mega Man X collection came out for the PlayStation 2 and GameCube. When you first boot up the collection, you'll see the menu screen where you can pick Mega Man X through Mega Man X6. By beating X1, X2, and X3, you unlock Battle and Chase. It's not difficult to do because X1 through X3 make up 3 of the 4 good games in this package. And they come with save slots now too, which the original X1 to X3 did not have. But now I'm just talking about the X collection. I already broke this down in a video from a few years back. I'm just here to talk about Battle and Chase, and there really isn't much to say. There's a huge car tournament in the Mega Man universe with a 10 million Zenny cash prize, so a bunch of robots enter to win. And you can play as a bunch of them like Mega Man, Roll, Bass, Shadow Man, Napalm Man, the works. When you win a race, you can take the parts from your opponent's vehicle and use them on yours, which is a cool way to adapt the Mega Man gameplay model to a racing game. But yeah, I didn't play much of this either because I got bored of it really fast. The track design is really linear, the obstacles aren't that difficult to get around, and the opponent's AI isn't very good. You just drive, boost, drift, grab item, etc, etc, etc for 5 straight laps. It was quite dull. I don't know, a game like Crash Team Racing on PS1 is just more interesting to play with better tracks, items, and a campaign that I played all the way through. This game, it just feels kinda cheap and not worth playing. It was nice that it got included in the US for the first time in the X collection, but it's not much of a showstopper. Next game. To take a break from the mediocrity, I'd like to look at some games that I thought were pretty good for what they are. Mega Man The Power Battle and Mega Man 2 The Power Fighters. These were Japanese exclusive arcade-only fighting games released in 1995 and 1996 respectively. Players in the US got access to them via the Mega Man Anniversary Collection that came out in 2003 for PS2, Xbox, and GameCube. The collection housed Mega Mans 1 through 8 and these 2 arcade games as a bonus. You unlock the first game by beating Needle Man in Mega Man 3 and unlock the second game by defeating Junkman in Mega Man 7. I've owned this collection for years now, and it was how I first played a lot of classic Mega Man games, and yet I've never played these arcade games for longer than a couple of minutes. Here's how they work. In the first game, you choose between Mega Man, Proto Man, and Bass. All 3 of them play pretty much the same, but there are minor differences, like Proto Man doing a shield bash instead of a slide, and Bass being able to air dash. But all 3 shoot standard shots and charge shots. When you start, you pick any one of 3 tiny campaigns. There's the Mega Man 1 and 2 mode where you battle robot masters from the first 2 games, Mega Man 3 through 6 mode where you do that for those games, and Mega Man 7 mode where you can probably guess you fight Mega Man 7 bosses. All the bosses look really good here in the Mega Man 7 sprite style. I said before that it's one of my all-time favorite Mega Man aesthetics, and that still holds true. Stages in this game are picked at random by the game, but it never really mattered that much because I thought the game was pretty easy. That's because the collection version gives you infinite lives, when I'm sure dying in the original made you pay to play more stages or start over. But I thought the gameplay loop here was a good idea. It's basically just like if you took the bosses of Mega Man games and turned it into an arcade game and you're done. You get weapons from defeated bosses and use them on other bosses. There are just no stages accompanying them. Since I'm usually pretty critical of Mega Man boss design, it's kind of out of character for me to appreciate this game's setup, but I thought the battles were enjoyable in this. The characters were responsive and jumped super high, and I thought the attacks were largely readable, and the no lives thing made it pretty easy to enjoy the game as a kind of one-and-done Mega Man arcade experience. This game will not set the world on fire to anyone, but if you liked Mega Man and Mega Man boss design, you'd probably enjoy this. The sequel, Power Fighters, was even better. It has improved animations for the returning characters, and like the first game, has cool music remixes for old stage themes, and great-looking sprites for old bosses. The setup in this is similar to the first game, but now you can also play as Duo from Mega Man 8, in addition to the returning Mega Man, Proto Man, and Bass. You also pick one of 3 campaigns with different bosses here, but instead of it being themed on specific games, each campaign has its own objective. One is a search for Wily, another is trying to save Roll, and the last is about recovering an experimental piece of technology. And in-game, you can now pick your stage order like a proper Mega Man game, so you can strategize with the weapons and pick what works best for you, which is definitely an improvement. But the most interesting part about this game is the story, for sure. It's not much. It's a Mega Man arcade game, but the people behind it did interesting work in creating ties to the overall lore of Mega Man. Like how in Mega Man's ending, Wily criticizes Mega Man for causing just as much destruction as Wily does, giving Mega Man doubt he's never had before, until Dr. Light tells him that if Wily's gonna try and take over the world, somebody has to stop him. That was interesting because it was a reminder of how Mega Man is a machine programmed to do what he's told by Dr. Light, even if he has human-like personality and capacity for doubt. Just not as much will to act on it, whereas Mega Man X was just a free-thinking machine entirely. And speaking of the Mega Man X era, the most well-known thing about this game is the ending of Bass's story. Wily shows him that he's got some plans in the works for a new, ultra-badass robot that will replace Bass if he doesn't get in line, and that is, of course, Zero. But this one image led to an immense amount of fan speculation, because that blueprint is Zero's design from Mega Man X2 and not X1. The Zero that Wily completed before he died. You know, Zero dies in X1, and then the X-Hunters bring him back in X2. The Japanese script of Mega Man X2 heavily implies that the leader of the X-Hunters was a robotic avatar of Dr. Wily somehow. That's given even more weight here because if this wasn't Wily, how would he know how to rebuild Zero to match the original blueprints? Unless this is Wily and the Zero from X1 was an unfinished version, and his X2 redesign is canon, not an art thing, because a flashback from X4 shows that Zero with no shoulder pads is what he used to look like before he was brought back in X2. It's pretty neat stuff. Only sad thing is that there's no easy way to play these arcade games now unless you track down the 2003 collection. If you're interested in playing them in some form, there is one way. Mega Man Battle and Fighters was an 8-bit demake of both games that Capcom released for the Neo Geo Pocket Color. In 2022, this version of the duo was localized and released on the Switch for $8. Since it's the same games, I didn't bother playing it. I felt like the arcade version was probably better anyway, but it is cool to see the 8-bit Mega Man sprite made to pose like the Mega Man 7 one. There's that. But I figured I'd briefly mention this port of these cool games before we get back to plunging our hands into the filth. Well, maybe this next one isn't filth, per se. It's Super Adventure Rockman, released on PlayStation and Sega Saturn in 1998. This game has never been re-released a single time in almost 30 years. Looking at the artwork, you might think this game is some epic quest, but no, Keiji Inafune, series producer, said on record that this was one of the worst classic Mega Man games of all time. Mainly because of its darker elements, like Wily shooting down choppers with human pilots. But what kind of game is it? Well, it's not really a game at all. You watch 3 episodes of Mega Man, uniquely animated and voiced, making decisions from a list of options that decide how things go and fight bosses in a first-person battle mode. It's not English, so I've never played it, but the animation looks good even if it's super compressed to fit on a PS1 disc. But what makes this game super infamous amongst fans is just the endings. When you lose a boss fight, you see a scene where Mega Man gets his ass kicked, and they created a unique one for every boss. And the mother of all bad endings comes at the end. Roll is in a robotic coma in this game because of some electromagnetic waves, and if you lose at the end, Mega Man goes home and finds out that Roll is dead, and he and Dr. Light cry over it while Dr. Wily takes over the fucking world. Like, jeez, this isn't some weird fanfic, it's an officially released Mega Man game. In Japan only, but officially released nevertheless. But that's just a brief taste of the kinds of weird-ass games released under the Mega Man banner. Like I said up top, there were far more than just these, like Japanese-exclusive Java phone games, and US-exclusive phone games, and a digital board game, and obscure PC games I have no access to. There are a lot of classic Mega Man games, official or otherwise. To cover every single one is a project I don't have the bandwidth to do, but I wanted to use this video as a chance to sample some of the spin-offs and provide a taste of what they're like. Not many were good though, but... What's that I hear? 2 more games? Mega Man on DOS? Incomplete video without them? Oh no, is this the part of the video where I melodramatically go, "Oh no, don't you make me play those games, no!" For those who don't know, DOS was an old operating system that came under the control of Microsoft before Windows became their main thing in the mid to late 90s. DOS machines were capable of running games on floppy disks. Obviously nothing impressive compared to today's PC games, but back in the 80s and early 90s, if you wanted to play games on your computer, this was one of the ways it was done. Now how did Mega Man get into the picture? Well, the gaming historian has a whole documentary on his channel about how these games came into existence. But to put it simply, Capcom worked with this guy named Stefan Rosner when porting Street Fighter to Commodore 64. Eventually, he got to work on his own Mega Man game for DOS, being a big fan of the games in the Nintendo. It was published by Capcom in 1990 to horrible reception for its lack of quality, and yet, Capcom allowed a sequel to be made in 1992 called Mega Man 3, The Robots Are Revolting. Yeah, they just skipped Mega Man 2 because who needs it? But then, the branding is weird nevertheless because these aren't ports of Mega Man 1 or 3, they're new games from scratch just called Mega Man and Mega Man 3. I knew of these borderline bootleg games before today. In fact, I bought Mega Man 3 on DOS at a used shop a few months ago. The guy at the store was like, "Yeah, sometimes I get stuff and I have no idea if it's ever gonna sell." And this was one of them, only for me to show up and buy it a couple days later after he got it.
Funny how things work out sometimes.
Obviously, I'm not using a DOS machine since I don't own one of those, so I only own this for show. I had to use the emulator DOSBox X to run the games. Figuring out how this was meant to work was pretty confusing since I've never done it before, but I eventually got it booted up with the optimal graphics setup and with keyboard controls. And the verdict is, hot take! This game fucking sucks! Everything about this screams bootleg, from the off-model Mega Man sprite to the generic backgrounds and foregrounds, the simple enemy designs, and the art in the stage select screen. It's just not Capcom quality. Like, what is this guy supposed to be? He looks like a motorcycle helmet with a face drawn on top. And when you play it, it gets even worse. To jump, you use the J key, you shoot with the spacebar, and can only move with the arrow keys, which is a really awkward setup when going from running to jumping. But then, most levels just saw me take damage from enemies flying all over the screen and I could barely see them, and when I could, my shots would barely hit them. Everything that could be bad about a Mega Man game was bad about this. It looks terrible and plays like garbage. I didn't beat a single stage because I got a game over in every single one. Awful game. And so is the sequel. It sure ain't the robots that are revolting here. Mega Man 3 on DOS adds more levels, which is absolutely a bad thing because nothing else was improved. I had all the same problems as I did in the first one. By complete chance, I picked a maze sewer level as my first one, and it sucked. At one point I died and respawned, but Mega Man spawned like a few tiles too high, so I was just out of sync with the game world. That was lovely. But after I was mercifully granted a game over, I picked another level. I then was like, wait, this sucks, I'm done. These games don't even have music, it's like I got trapped in a black hole or something while playing this. But while these games suck, and I hope to never touch them again for the rest of my life, there is a reason why I decided to include them in this video and end on them. These are some of the worst Mega Man games ever made, because they were officially licensed Capcom products you had to pay money to play. But over 30 years later, who really cares that they're that bad? These games are, to me, the epitome of this one line of argumentation I've kind of gotten tired of seeing in the comments section. In my revisit to Mega Man X7 from 2022, I declared it the worst Mega Man game. And I get a ton of comments saying, oh yeah, well then I guess you haven't played Mega Man DOS! Like, yeah, of course I haven't played Mega Man DOS, and I highly doubt most of those commenters had played it either. I can now say that I have, and I can confirm that they are less enjoyable than Mega Man X7. And I'd say most of the games in this video are less enjoyable than Mega Man X7. But that's the thing. I could have told you that long before I played any of these games, because to me, context matters when talking about bottom-of-the-barrel F-tier games. Yes, Mega Man 3, The Robots Are Revolting, is one of the worst Mega Man games. But it's just a DOS game from over 30 years ago that was designed by a single guy back when computer games weren't as easy to make and there weren't as many Mega Man games to compare it to either. It's just an insignificant game that almost nobody will ever play. It's a funny piece of history in that it's got an interesting story behind its creation, and its apparent lack of quality is funny to laugh at, but that's about it. A game like Mega Man X7 is much different. That was made by Capcom, released on PS2 in the same holiday season as Jak 2 and Ratchet & Clank 2, actually good platformers, which X7 was not. X7 was a major release in an iconic franchise, and it was horrendous. A game that will forever be an important part of the series' legacy, that will be re-released and remastered for all time because of its association with that legacy. It is a game people will actually play, maybe even expecting or assuming it to be good because the other ones are. This is just my own personal philosophy as a critic, but I don't think all games are equal or made the same. I enjoy making a video like this because laughing at a game like Mega Man on Game Gear is funny. The game is, in my opinion, worse than X6 or X7, but I'm not going to treat it as harshly or remember it nearly as much as those. To use another example I always see, yeah, Sonic Jam on Gamecom is a worse game than Sonic Forces by several magnitudes. But one of them is a 2017 PS4, Xbox One Sonic Team game, and the other is a fucking Gamecom game. I just don't think all games ought to be reviewed as though they are the same. That's just me. Like I said, I enjoy these dives into obscure spin-offs because I think they can be entertaining to see what weird shit you find. Just don't take them too seriously when comparing and contrasting the best and the worst of a series. You can probably take it as a given that Mega Man DOS is at the bottom when talking about why X7 is the worst real Mega Man game. But that's about all the time we have for today. Hope people enjoyed this little trip through spin-off territory, as next up is Mega Man Powered Up for the PSP, a full remake of Mega Man 1, so I hope people are looking forward to that. Because in the meantime, I'll close by saying what I always do. If you made it this far into the video, I thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.